Thank you, Ellen, and it is a great honor and an even greater pleasure to be at the American Antiquarian Society. I'm going to start by telling you the road that brought me here. The road started with this book, The People's History of the American Revolution. When I started on this book, I was interested in basically adding to the story of the Revolution. I wanted to include all the story of common people. This included farmers, artisans, the poor men and boys who did the fighting, women, Native Americans, African Americans, all the people who really get left out of the traditional telling of the tale. I wanted to include these people for several reasons. One reason was the question of social justice, give the people their due. Beyond that, a little more seriously, if we marginalize people in history, as these people are often marginalized, we learn how to marginalize people in the present. It's through the study of history that we basically learn the grammar of the political process. So when we study history in school year after year after year and only hear the stories of the elite and the leaders, we learn how to treat the political process in those terms. So that was another reason I wanted to add to that story and make it fuller and richer and include these people. Well, what I found out is in adding to the story, I did even more than add this. You have to do even more than add the story. Sometimes you have to change the story. And that's what led me to Worcester, because there was a story happening in Massachusetts about the beginning of the Revolution which simply wasn't ringing true. It was not only misleading, but inaccurate. So I'm going to give you very briefly the standard telling that you've all heard before. It started in Boston. There was a lot of unrest with the Stamp Act riots, the Boston Massacre, eventually the Boston Tea Party. Some of these famous names involved: James Otis, Sam Adams, Joseph Warren, John Hancock. You've heard over and over. And these people kept plugging away and trying to rouse the masses, and eventually succeeded in doing so for the Boston Tea Party. The British government then punished Boston for that with the coercive acts. There were 4 coercive acts: the Boston Port Act, which closed the port of Boston, and 3 other sort of technical things. This is the traditional telling I'm giving you. The Boston Port Act was a great hardship to Boston. Notice the number of times in which the term Boston appears in the story. It was a great hardship to them, and it was intended to isolate them from the rest of the colony and the rest of the province and the rest of the colonies. But in fact, it had the reverse effect, and the kindly patriots in other places, in a sort of philanthropic gesture, came to Boston's aid, and somehow, through a series of other events, this eventually led to Lexington and Concord, the shocker around the world. That is more or less the traditional telling. Now, I'm going to start seeing how that looks when we stop using the term Boston over and over and over, and look through our lens. If we just take our historical lens and just point it over this way at Boston most of the time, and just shift it around over here to the west and outside Boston, where instead of talking about 5% of the population, we're talking about 95% of the population living outside of Boston at that time. What's happening for them, and how are they related to this? Well, they are not really integrally involved in the imperial debates during the 1760s. Some people are, some of the leadership and so on, but the mass of the people are not as involved as those in Boston. In 1772 and 1773, the Boston Committee of Correspondence circulates letters to the towns in the countryside and receives responses, and these responses actually indicate that there's a lot of interest and a lot of concern about these imperial problems with Britain. There's an excellent book on that by Richard D. Brown, Revolutionary Politics in Massachusetts. And so far the story isn't significantly different, but now it starts to change. In response to the Boston Tea Party, the British government passes 4 coercive acts. Not only is there the Boston Port Act, but there are 3 others. One of these is called the Massachusetts Government Act. The Massachusetts Government Act essentially disenfranchises the entire population of Massachusetts. These people had had 150 years of basically self-rule. Their town meeting, by the way, 150 years is more time than separates us today from the Civil War. So I'll give you a sense of perspective of how ingrained the community processes that were going on in New England were at that time. These people were very attached to their town meetings. They were very into their fellowship of worship in their congregational churches. And they were used to a lot of self-government. So to have the Massachusetts Government Act declare that they could no longer have any town meetings was somewhat of an affront to them, needless to say. The Act said you can have one town meeting to elect a representative who, as we shall see, no longer has any power. If you want anything else on the agenda of that town meeting, you have to submit it in writing in advance and have it approved by the governor who is appointed by the Crown. In other words, it's sort of a bathroom pass approach here. You know, go to your teacher. And these people did not respond well to this, or we might say, as we will see, they did respond well to this. But that was one of the features. They also, the Massachusetts Government Act made the councilors, the people on the council at that point was both the upper house or senate of the legislative body of the general court, and it was also kind of the governor's cabinet. They had approval rights for a lot of the people, for instance, the judges, who we'll talk about in a minute. That these councilors who had been previously elected by the representatives who were elected by the people, so it was, they were ultimately responsible to the people, would be appointed directly by the Crown. So sure enough, King George III appointed 36 mandamus councilors, they were called. And finally, it dismantled the entire court system, or rather, it put the entire court system, which was very important for these people, out of the people's control. It didn't dismantle it, it dismantled the people's control over it. Previously, through the council, they got the approval rights of the judges, and now all judges would be appointed directly by the Crown with absolutely no say on the part of the people. So you see, there was very little control they had of their government. They were very concerned that the judges might well become corrupt, might collect on unpaid debts, might collect taxes that the Parliament would levy on them, and these people couldn't pay them and throw them in jail, or rather take their land from them, or take livestock, or basically reduce them from freeholders to tenants. This was a very real concern for them. So they wouldn't have anything of it. When I'm talking about they, I'm talking about virtually the entire population of Massachusetts at that time. Previous to this, there was a genuine debate between basically Tories and Whigs, or Tories and Patriots. Patriots were certainly in the majority, but as we know, right here in Worcester, for instance, there was a strong minority of Tories and Loyalists. These people, for instance, before the Act was passed, came very close to being even in the town meeting. They had several votes about passing patriotic resolutions that were passed by only a handful of votes. There was a very strong Tory presence. As soon as the Government Act was passed, what was meant to take effect, the date of August 1st, that's a key date, everything after August 1st, everything changed, because suddenly the Tory position was no longer tenable. You could no longer say, yes, we should stay loyal to Britain because this would do us well. It was clear that if you stay loyal to Britain, you're living under the Massachusetts Government Act and you have no power at all. So the people, just about to a man, rose up and rebelled. And you must, instead of maybe say a 70-30 split or 80-20, you suddenly have well over 90% of the people not only in favor of this thing, but absolutely incensed and outraged about standing up against this act. So what are they going to do? Well, what they're going to do is basically a kind of civil disobedience. They say, we are simply not going to abide by this law. Let's take the town meeting provision. Do you think anybody actually said, no, we will stop our town meetings because the king said we can't have them? No, nobody applied for the bathroom pass. They just went ahead and had their meetings. So what's the king going to do? Well, in most places he couldn't do anything. He's just sort of hanging out around Boston with his troops. Actually, not the king at this point. I'm talking about his representative, Governor Thomas Gage, who was both the governor of the state and the commander of, not the state, the province at that point, and the commander-in-chief of the British forces in North America. He's around Boston, and he has no say of what's happening in the countryside, no effective control, to stop these people having their town meetings. In Salem, however, where the provincial capital is located, he tries. He tries to stop it. People announce a town meeting. By the way, there was an official decree against them doing so. He says, we can't, these people are criminals, I'm going to arrest them. So he does arrest them, puts them in jail. 2 of them post bail, and the others say, no, we're not going to post bail. We're not going to give the king a farthing. And they stay in jail until 3,000 farmers start coming at them from the surrounding countryside. And in the face of these 3,000 people starting to sort of come towards town, they are released from jail and on their own recognizance. And Governor Gage is there with 2 companies of troops, but he does not actually dare confront, at this point, 3,000 people who are forming basically in support of them. So this is the first showdown, standoff there. Now, let's take these counselors. There were 36 counselors appointed by the Crown. As soon as they were announced, and some of them took their oaths in Boston and Salem, the people went about telling these people that they should not serve the Crown. And here's some of the ways they told them. When George Watson went to his church in Plymouth, to his meeting house for a religious service, he walked in the door and everybody else stood up and walked out. Now, in Congregational New England, where the fellowship of worship is very important, this was a very supreme insult. When Josiah Edson of Bridgewater he was a deacon of the church, and he led his church in psalm, and the people were supposed to respond with a hymn, silence. Once again, this insult. Now, some of it wasn't quite so gentle. There were also nighttime mobs. Commodore Loring, by the way, a lot of the British officials had military titles, and they were famous war heroes like Commodore Loring and Brigadier Timothy Ruggles, who some of you people might be familiar with. When Commodore Loring was faced at one point with a mob, basically, of people with their faces blackened in the night and brandishing cutlasses. Ruggles himself, from Worcester County, he was hounded in many different times. Once the people, I think it was when he was traveling in Dartmouth, took a hold of his prized horse and cut off the mane, cut off the tail, painted the horse. There were all kinds of intimidation techniques. However, these were done, the intimidation might be done by a handful of people. But the main protest, and the serious protest, went far beyond nighttime mobs. Let's take Timothy Payne from Worcester. He had been one of the counselors, one of the 4 from Worcester County, and the people wanted him to resign. So they sent out riders. People of Worcester said, we're going to go at this fellow, and they sent out riders within the next morning to the neighboring towns. 1,500 or 2,000 or 3,000, we're not sure how many people, converge on Worcester. There's 3 different accounts, that's why we don't know. One says 1,500, one 2,000, one 3,000. Converge on Worcester and are with basically the sole intent of telling Timothy Payne that he must resign his seat. So Timothy says, well, I guess I have to. And he writes out a resignation and hands it to a small delegation of 5 people who have been selected to deal with him. And so the delegation says, well, that sounds good, we have to run it by the people. So they take it out, run it by the people, they say, not good enough. Send it back, we want it stronger. So they take it back, he writes a stronger version. Come out again, run it by the people. Yeah, that sounds better, but we want to see his face. So he has to come outside and have somebody read the statement for him. Good enough? No, not good enough. He's got to read it himself. So he reads it himself. And then there's a big crowd, so they can't all hear. We didn't hear. I can read it again. So they form 2 lines, and he starts walking between the lines, reciting his resignation over and over. And finally, the people are satisfied. Note the modus operandi here. The representatives who are negotiating with him have absolutely no power to do anything, to make any decisions. They're actually just elected to do their work for that day only, and then they have no further power. This is the way this is happening, by the way, all over Massachusetts like this. So the representatives are serving basically for 1 day. This is the ultimate in term limits. and anything that they decide has to be run by the full body of the people. This also happens very similar fashion in Cambridge with a crowd of 4,000 people, with the Lieutenant Governor of the province, Thomas Oliver, and he is also on the council, and they make him resign in a very similar process. So you see, people are gathering everywhere. Now, by the way, this is just a warm-up. It's going to get better. Because now we deal with the courts, and the courts were very, as I mentioned, very dear to these people, very crucial to their lives. The courts were more than, they were the courts that had the power to take their property away. The courts at that time were also effectively the administrators of county government. There was no separate county government. It was the Court of General Sessions was basically the administration on dealing with county government. They do roads and so on like this. So, on August 1st, the act takes effect. On August 16th, the first court is meant to hold session in Berkshire County at Great Barrington. 1,500 people show up, fill the courthouse, tell the judges they can't come in, and the court is closed. The next one is at Springfield. At Springfield, the estimates are 3,000 to 4,000 people. Now at Springfield, we have an account, an eyewitness account, and I'm going to actually use some of that account. It's going to take a little bit. I won't read the whole thing because it goes into great detail, but I want to read it to you to give you the flavor of what these people are really doing. Okay. So this is Springfield. It's a letter written by Joseph Clark. Springfield, August 30th, 1774. We arrived in town about noon this day and found all the people gathered before us. A committee from the body of the county had just waited upon the court to demand a satisfactory answer, that is, whether they meant to hold their commission and exercise their authority according to the new principle of Parliament, that's the Massachusetts Government Act, which being answered in the negative, it was put to a vote after, remember it's put to a vote, everything is going to be put to a vote. It's put to a vote after the said message and answer were read to the people assembled before the meeting house, whether they were willing the court should sit. It passed in the negative, meaning that they cannot sit. Then the people paraded before Mr. Parsons, that's the large tavern on the corner. From thence marched back again to the meeting house and demanded the appearance of judges. The judges came according to their desire, and amidst the crowd in a sandy, sultry place, exposed to the sun, gave a satisfactory answer to such questions as were asked. So imagine these judges, with all their heavy robes in the hot August afternoon, exposed to the sun, having to face people. It was also demanded of them that they should make a declaration in writing, signed by all the justices and lawyers in the county, renouncing in the most express terms any commission which should be given out to them under the new arrangement, which was immediately complied with and executed accordingly. So then they, after getting these resignation statements in writing, they actually started dealing one by one with all the notorious Tories. And they had a sort of informal tribunal. Now this is where I'm not going to read it all because they're bringing up over and over and over different people. But I'm going to just read a couple to show you the kinds of things that would happen. Colonel Worthington was next brought upon the board. The sight of him flashed lightning from their eyes. Their spirits were already raised, and the sight of this object gave them additional force. He had not refused his new office of counselor. For that reason especially, he was very obnoxious. But the people kept their tempers. He attempted to harangue them in mitigation of his conduct, but he was soon obliged to desist. The people were not to be dallied with. Nothing would satisfy them but a renunciation in writing of his office as counselor. So then they talked to some other people. I'll skip a few people down here. Mr. Moses Bliss was brought into the ring, but the accusation against him was not well supported, and he passed off in silence. The sheriff was the next who was demanded. He accordingly appeared. He was charged with saying some imprudent things, but none of them were approved, and he departed. So this is not a blind mob, you see. They're reasoning. They're actually evaluating evidence and coming to decisions. Now, who decides that they let him off? All the people decide. This is kind of, Ken Moynihan has used the term mobilized town meetings. I really like that. So, okay. Here's another one. Captain Merrick of Munson was next treated with for uttering imprudent expressions. I thought they would have tarred and feathered him, and I thought he almost deserved it. He was very stubborn as long as he dare be, but at length he made some concessions, but not until after they had carted him. In other words, sometimes they would have to use more force than others, but finally they got it. No man received the least injury, but the strictest order of justice were observed. The people to their honor behaved with the greatest order and regularity, a few individuals excepted, and avoided as much as possible confusion. The people of each town, being drawn into separate companies, marched with staves and music. The trumpets sounding, drums beating, fifes playing, and colors flying struck passions of the soul into a proper tone and inspired martial courage into each. I mean, what a nice, vivid description. Now, this is happening, mind you, in Springfield, and similar things are happening in Worcester. They're soon going to be happening in Plymouth, Concord, Taunton, every county seat outside of Boston. This letter concludes, then it goes on to some more. The people will probably be condemned for preventing the stirring of the court, but their conduct yet is commendable. I wait till morning, hope nothing will be transacted rashly tonight, for it is given out by the fearful that there is a number looking. In other words, they've done their thing, but he's kind of worried about mobs. Well, in fact, all these assemblies of people are convening under what they call county conventions, and they all pass resolutions against mobs. They want people to understand that they are conducting serious affairs of state, that they aren't kind of a blind, enraged mob. But on the other hand, they do like to celebrate. I like to think of those people after Springfield and after Worcester returning afterwards to their taverns, their local taverns, and raising a toast or two, and the huzzahs resounding off the walls. I mean, these people are obviously, they know that they're doing big things. So much so, here's what happens in Plymouth. This is a second-hand account, not a first-hand. The other, of course, was first. Yesterday met at Plymouth the body of that county to the number of 4,000, when they proceeded to make all the addressers and protesters there make a public recantation, after which they attempted to remove a rock, the one on which their forefathers first landed when they came to this country, which lay buried in a wharf 5 feet deep, up into the center of the town near the courthouse. The way being uphill, they found it impractical, because after they had dug it up, they found it to weigh 10 tons at least. Okay, so believe it or not, it still gets better, because what happens now is on September 1st, the British march. They're trying to do something. They don't know what to do. They grab a little powder just right across the river, and people get up in arms and they flock towards Cambridge, hearing a rumor that 6 men were killed, 6 patriots were killed. The rumor proved to be false, but not until somewhere between 20,000 and 100,000 patriots start marching towards Boston. This is the famous powder alarm. This is about the only event that is actually sometimes frequently mentioned in history texts, the powder alarm. Those are contemporary estimates. The contemporary estimates range from 20,000 to 100,000 people. One by one, as they get near Boston, they hear the rumor is false and it dissipates. But now in Worcester, the court is slated to meet on September 6th. This is just 4 days after people are marching in a powder alarm. And Governor Gage has seen what's happened, seen that mobilization. He's heard the word that people are mobilized. Now in Worcester, Gage had repeatedly, throughout the month, stated that he was going to draw the line at Worcester, because his court had actually been embarrassed the previous April when the Superior Court met here. And they had forced the Chief Justice to not attend. So that he was already embarrassed by it. He said, I'm not going to let those patriots do it again. I don't think he called them patriots. And I'm going to hold firm in Worcester. I'm going to send troops. And he's sending letters to the ministry in Britain that he's sending troops. And the people here know it. And they start arming. And all summer they are arming. Well, in late summer they're arms. And they're passing these town resolutions. Everybody come, get enough powder. If your neighbor doesn't have some, give it to him or sell it to him. Everybody has to be armed. They get very nervous about whether they're going to have to face the British alone. So the people of Worcester call the first MultiCounty Congress to try to mobilize support for the opposition. These are not the people of Boston. By the way, neither was the port closures the idea of the people of Boston. That originated with the people of Berkshire County. A letter from the Pittsfield Committee saying, no, it was Berkshire Committee, saying, we think the court should close. What do you think? And they sent it to Boston. Boston says, hey, that sounds like a good idea. But the initiative was from the country. Once again here, the initiative is from Worcester. Because they want to mobilize support, because they think there's going to be a standoff. And the people are ready. So for this particular date, they don't have to dispatch riders to the countryside. Everybody knows September 6th is the day. So September 6th comes, but in fact, Governor Gage does not show up with his troops. He'd be a fool to do so. He only has 3,000 troops total, and he would have to bring them all here and face not only the more than that number of people riding in Worcester, but very likely tens of thousands of other people coming to their aid. So he wisely decides to stay at home. This leaves the 20 or so judges, justices, and court officials stranded with no support. And so they show up to work for court on a routine September 6th. And of course, this court is all occupied by patriots from the towns of Worcester and Spencer. And they have to retreat to the Haywood's Tavern, which is about halfway down Main Street near present-day Exchange. And they huddle up there during the day while the people start organizing themselves and assembling themselves. And this is 4,622 people. We'll get to in a little bit. I'll tell you how we know that number. And these people are coming from 37 towns throughout Worcester County. And they organize themselves along Main Street. Meanwhile, to orchestrate this event, by the way, there's a lot of particular details, and every one of these details has to be approved by 4,622 people. So it takes long. See, whoever said democracy was efficient? It was cumbersome then, it's cumbersome now, but if you go through the process, you're a lot stronger, and these people did bother to go through the process. So finally, later in the afternoon, they have it together, and they march the judges out, and they, hats in hand, and they march through these ranks, kind of walking the gauntlet, reciting their resignations 30 times, because they go once, and for this group of people, how many people do we have here? Maybe 200 or 300 in this hall. So multiply this by well over 10. You're lining up about along Main Street, and they're walking through. So next time, every time you guys walk down Main Street, now just think of that. From Exchange up to the courthouse, just imagine these people. So this is a very dramatic event. And basically, this pretty much closes, actually, not pretty much, this absolutely terminates British authority in Massachusetts. By the end of the month, all the counties have had their basically overthrows, and the government is overthrown. Well, what happens when the government is overthrown? Something has to take its place. There's a vacuum. People are in what's called a state of nature. They don't like this because these are mostly property owners because they're the ones who could vote, and they want some protection. They want government, so they have to figure out how are they going to create one. At first, it's just county conventions. These are just ad hoc groups of kind of concerned, active patriots. And they have no particular authority, but in the vacuum, they do things like grant liquor licenses, and they start to organize the militia because they sense the British is likely to fight back, and they do reorganize the militia. And so they start acting sort of de facto like a government. They also move towards a provincial congress, and where people would, from all over the province, come together and actually form some sort of facsimile of a government. And once again, this is the move for this starts with Worcester, with the move from the west, not from Boston, and proceeds despite it's outlawed specifically by Governor Gage. It says you guys are not allowed to meet as a provincial congress, and they meet anyway. So imagine if today we said, okay, we don't like what Congress did, we're going to have our own Congress. And it gets outlawed, and you go ahead and meet anyway. Okay, this is a very revolutionary act, a very strong act. And in doing that, the people of the town, there's several towns, by the way, are beginning to write letters and issue declarations and pass resolutions, which sounds conspicuously like the Declaration of Independence. And this is not only before the Declaration of Independence, but remember, this whole time we are talking about the year before Lexington and Concord. There hasn't been a shot fired around the world. This is before Lexington and Concord, when supposedly in the traditional text, all this is just minor events leading up to the Revolution. You know, I don't know how you're relating to this, but to me these aren't minor events. This isn't just, you know, something leading up to the Revolution. This was the Revolution. They are overthrowing, they have overthrown the government. There's no more British authority anywhere in Massachusetts. And now, listen to these instructions. These instructions are given to Timothy Bigelow, who is the town of Worcester's representative to the provincial Congress. And this is given the day before the provincial Congress is intended to sit. And he says, by the way, talk about democracy, you didn't just elect somebody and have them go off and decide whatever you wanted to do. When they had elected a representative, then they would proceed to give him instructions as to how he was behaved and what he was to vote for. So this is what they're telling Timothy Bigelow. If all the infractions of our rights by the acts of the British Parliament be not redressed, and we restored to the full enjoyment of all our privileges to a punctilio, before the day of your meeting, which happens to be the following morning. In other words, if the British don't surrender and repeal all their acts, you know, here our plea gets over by email or something to London, and by return have rescinded this act before tomorrow morning, then this is what you're supposed to do. You are to consider the people of this province absolved on their part from the obligation therein contained, and to all intents and purposes reduced to a state of nature. And you are to exert yourself in devising ways and means to raise from the dissolution of the old Constitution, as from the ashes of the phoenix, a new form, wherein all officers shall be dependent on the suffrages of the people for their existence as such, whatever unfavorable constructions our enemies may put upon such procedure. The exigency of our public affairs leaves us no other alternative from a state of anarchy or slavery. Strong stuff. They're saying, I think we need a new government here. Okay. So this is huge. This is a revolution. As a matter of fact, I'm going to read you a classic statement, classic definition. The scholars differ widely. Scholars love to argue about definitions, and of course revolution is going to be something that they particularly love to argue about. But here's a common sense definition, which I think no matter what other definition you include, makes a lot of sense for a political revolution. This comes from the Random House Webster's College Dictionary of 1997. A complete and forcible overthrow and replacement of an established government or political system by the people governed. That's what happened. Overthrew it and started the process. Didn't complete it, of course, but certainly started the process of replacing it. Okay? The people at the time knew this. Governor Gage knew this. Here's what Governor Gage had to say, right in the middle of it. The flames of sedition have spread universally throughout the country beyond conception. Conservatives knew this, the few who dared to do anything. Well, actually, nobody at this point dared to do anything anymore. If you wanted to do something and you wanted to, for instance, maintain your position on the council or in some official capacity, you had to retreat behind British lines, otherwise you were not welcome. Some people retreated just inside their houses and they only wrote in their journals. Here is the statement of Jonathan Judd. He is a shopkeeper, the son of a preacher over there in Hampshire County. And he says very succinctly in his journal, "Government has now devolved upon the people, and they seem to be for using it." So that's basically it. That's the story of the revolution. Now I want to make a couple of comments here on the importance of this story. This story basically forces us to rewrite history in three very important ways. First of all, on a most pragmatic level, we simply have to reset the clock. The revolution didn't start on Patriots' Day. Sorry, bad message to deliver for those of you who have the holiday next week. But maybe we'll get a longer one in September. But it didn't start. Certainly, I'm not taking anything away from the crucial importance that Lexington and Concord have in our history and in the history of the Revolution. But it wasn't the start of the Revolution. The Revolution had happened. What it was a military offensive by the British government trying to reclaim countryside that they had lost the previous summer. So we have to rewrite history to state that in so many terms. That's what it was. Furthermore, it had great importance because once it happened and blood was shed, this mobilized the support of the other colonies. Once again, great importance, but just don't call it the first day of the revolution, because it wasn't. Because the revolution is something deeper than a bunch of foreign soldiers coming firing and you fire back. It's much deeper. The Great Revolution is rooted in very strong acts by the whole body of the people throughout the province, not just in one location. So we rewrite the date. We also have to rewrite the manner in which revolution is seen. Basically, the character of that revolution. The revolution was not driven by the Boston Patriots. The revolution at this stage, I'm talking about the revolution of 1774, which is the first transfer of authority to the Americans, was not driven by the Boston Patriots. It was not driven by the Founding Fathers, who were meeting as a Continental Congress in Philadelphia. It wasn't driven by them. It was driven by the people in Massachusetts, the common farmers and artisans who were making that revolution. Now, this isn't to say that those people didn't have a role. And also, by the way, it's not to say that we can't still celebrate Paul Revere's ride, because Paul Revere has a ride in this story, you'll be happy to know. His ride is, this happens, I think, 7 months and 2 days before the ride that you know about. But on September 16th, he shows up in Philadelphia with news that that Massachusetts. You hear that hit and split? See how deeply ingrained this is? And for me, of all people. That Massachusetts has rebelled and is basically, the revolution is a fait accompli. And with him, he's carrying the Suffolk County resolves. Now, this is the great irony. The Suffolk County is the county which Boston has. And they wrote up, every county had resolves supporting this revolution, and basically kind of the formalization of it. And Suffolk County did theirs too. Ironically, they were the only ones who couldn't overthrow the courts because the British troops were there. But they had all the educated people, So theirs like read cleaner than the others in all erudite like that. So that's, and plus they're connected with Paul Revere. So they show up, they don't show up with the Worcester County resolves, the Suffolk County resolves, and say, hey, the revolution has happened. And so right now, the Congress is in the middle of this huge debate between moderates and radicals. And the radicals, present this, hey, the revolution has happened, and the moderates are just stymied. They can't do anything about it. If they oppose it, then suddenly they're unpatriotic, and the rug is just pulled out from under them. And they have no choice, really, but to support it. And sure enough, the Continental Congress the following day on the 17th, much to John Adams' delight, he said, this is it. We're all, this is it. This is the moment we've been waiting for. And supports the Suffolk resolves. So we have to rewrite this, showing that it is the leaders who were not the leaders. It was the people who were the leaders. And the leaders kind of came along and did their role. And I'm not belittling their role at all. They had a very important role from this point on. They had to take the given fact of revolution and make it palatable to the rest of the colonies. This meant, by the way, that they had to slow down the revolution because the people from the West were moving too fast. And in the book, you'll see, I have 3 sections in the book. The first American Revolution. The first is the background before the revolution. The second is the revolution of 1774. And the third is aftermath, what happened after the transfer of authority. And part of that shows that the Boston leaders and the people we know about made a very concerted attempt to slow down the revolution, because it was moving so fast that they were worried that the other colonies wouldn't support it. So they did very important political work, actually, in slowing down the revolution to a point where other colonies could finally support it after Lexington and Concord, and they could rally behind that. So I'm not writing them out of history, but I am correcting history. And they have a role, and the people have a role. Okay? Let me just give you an example of how history has to be written in a very practical way. This comes from the latest book on the American Revolution from Gordon Wood. Gordon Wood, like most historians, gives a paragraph or less to the events of 1774, the mass uprisings of 1774, and he does not characterize them as a revolution. Here is how he characterizes them. Mass meetings that sometimes attracted thousands of aroused colonists endorsed resolutions and called for new political organizations. Okay? attracted. The mass meetings attracted thousands of people like you'd be attracted to TV. Oh, there's a mass meeting tonight, I think I'll turn on to that. At those mass meetings, they endorsed resolutions. Oh, that sounds like a good idea, you know, and they called for new political organizations. What happened was the mass meetings were organized by people who attended them, who originated and passed resolutions themselves, and created, not called for, created new political organizations and made a revolution. That's how we have to rewrite the history. You see, the language is different because we're casting these people in as primary protagonists. Okay, so the final way is how intensely and practically insanely democratic this was. We have to realize this is the third major way we have to rewrite our founding, because right now, when you look at the founding as our founding fathers, they were not that fond of democracy. They were from the elite class. They were merchants, lawyers, and slave owners, and they used the people, but they did not want to give the people full control. They were scared of democracy, mob rule, and so on. You know, many of their letters suggest this, and certainly the Constitution which they created suggests this. They had enough power to the people in there to get it passed and no more. You have one half of one branch of the government, one half of 1/3 of the government is elected by the people. There's no direct, people don't elect the Senate, they don't elect the President, they don't elect the Supreme Court, they just elect the House. In contrast, you have these just wildly furious Democrats creating the revolution with this full-on participatory democracy, just like they were talking about in the 1960s. Participatory democracy, well, that's actually how that was the first overthrow was done, through this very cumbersome but very strong and energetic democratic process. Now, probably, we're moving towards questions here, and I'm going to ask the first question myself, but my guess is that 5 out of 6 of you or more are going to have this question, is that, if this is true, why don't we know about this, right? I mean, isn't that a big question? I mean, whoa, you know, what's going on here that we don't know about this intense story? So I'm going to respond to that question first, when I ask myself, and then we'll open it up to other questions. Okay, there's several reasons. First of all, the very democracy helped ensure its anonymity. These people very self-consciously would march under no self-proclaimed, self-promoting, charismatic leaders. They wouldn't have them. Without those leaders, you don't have the kind of protagonist that you like to pin history on. So you have a sort of anonymous revolution, which is a less known revolution, but think of it, a much stronger revolution than if they're just following some leader. So it's less known, but stronger. So too with the fact that it was ubiquitous. Ubiquitous means everywhere and anywhere, all over the place. And if you have something that's erupting everywhere, it's hard to get a clear storyline. I mean, where are you going to talk about it? Where do you get a grip on it? So like you talk about this, what about that? It doesn't lend itself to that natural telling. So once again, less known, less told, but stronger because it is ubiquitous. And believe me, Governor Gage knew this. I mean, he's constantly writing these things. I don't know where to tackle these guys. I mean, I can't go at them because where would I even start? So once again, less known and stronger. So too with the fact that it's bloodless. Think of it. Let's say 30% of the people were opposed to this revolution. You'd have 30% of the people backed by the British forces against 70% of the others who were the patriots. Bloodshed? Obviously. Of course there'd be bloodshed. You'd have a big, huge civil war. We call it a revolution. So instead of 70-30 split, let's say we had 95-5, which is about maybe what we had, certainly over 95% of the people. What are the 20 unarmed judges hiding out in Haywood's Tavern going to do when confronted by 4,622 militiamen on the street? Are we going to have bloodshed? No. Once again, less story there because we like, we like bloodshed in our revolutions. It makes for a better story. But less known, but much stronger revolution. Because the reason there's no bloodshed is precisely because it was stronger. There's other reasons. What a good story, what a strong story the Lexington Concord story makes. A few unarmed soldiers, attacked by the British Army. That makes wonderful propagandizing material, and sure enough, that's what happens. So that story has been repeated so often that it tends to, in the kind of the mythological nation forming, that it tends to drown out what happened the summer before. Then there's the problem of sources. We have the media is all located in Boston at this time. Isaiah Thomas has not yet moved out to Worcester to either set up his press or create the American Antiquarian Society. Both these events come after this. So there's no press coverage, and nor are the people like John Adams, Sam Adams, any of these people writing about this event, because they're not here. You know, the famous people we study, we have volumes and volumes about them, simply aren't here. So if we focus on them, we don't get the story. Okay. But you got to get the story. So I'm going to just close here by telling you briefly how I got the story. I got to get it somehow. And where am I going to look? Well, you go to the source. And the source is in the primary sources. So, off I come from California. I've already sensed there's a story here from the occasional paragraph here, paragraph there. And I say I've got to locate the primary sources. So I come to the various museums I consult in this area. Ford's Museum in Northampton, the stores in Longmeadow, Connecticut Valley Historical Museum, the Worcester Historical Museum, the Massachusetts Historical Society, and the New York Public Library actually has very important papers, the Sam Adams Letters, which has all the letters to and from Sam Adams while he's at the Continental Congress, and all his people are in Boston writing back, what do we do? These people are crazy, they've overthrown the government, how can we slow them down? So all those letters are at the New York Public Library, as are the minutes, the correspondences of the Boston Committee to and from the towns. So we get a lot of the towns writing back and we hear what they're saying. And then I come, of course, to the American Antiquarian Society. So I want to actually paint a picture of this, because this is how it could work for you if you are a researcher. First of all, I had done my homework. I'd done my basic homework in the sense that I knew the basics, some of the sources that I could get elsewhere, I had already procured. I had gone to the public library, the university library, I consulted the things that are in print, and I knew how to get them elsewhere. But there's some things that were mentioned that seemed like I could only get them here. But I had to find out what exactly that was, where it was stored, and most importantly, what it said. So, walk in the door, this guy from California, coming out of nowhere, not part of the academic establishment, nobody here knows me. I'm not like, welcome to, oh, Dr. So-and-so, and come on in, I'm expecting you. I just sign in my name, and a nice person there says, what is your interest? And I say briefly, well, just wait a little bit, and in a few minutes somebody will talk to you. So they take me into, one of the staff then frees up and walks me into the room. You'll notice there's a room to the side of the entrance there after I've signed in. And by the way, left all my pens in the other room. Important. Pencils only. I don't have to explain, I guess you understand. You do not want pens in this kind of historical, these materials. So they come and they ask, what are you involved in? What have you done so far? What are you interested in? And they show me how this library works, and they kind of walk me through it. They come over here, they show me how the call cards, what you fill out. They point me to the manuscript indices here. And first you look in the blue volumes, and that shows you where to go in the black volumes here. It has synopses of what's involved in various manuscript material. This was before it was online or before I was online, but anyway, possibly both. I don't know when AAS went online, but I wasn't then. It's just a few years ago. But you can access these now online, I'm told, so look, that can be done. You can also look in the other material, the traditional card catalogs here for non-manuscript materials. I also use the newspaper room over there in back, where it has a full array of New England newspapers, perhaps more. I only was looking for New England newspapers in there, and I spent a lot of time there. I made several trips here. I discovered some wonderful materials here, and some of them are on display right here. There are the Stephen Salisbury letters, a lot of letters that he and his brother Sam who was in Boston were writing back and forth a lot about business, but also some other things. And his letters are absolutely fascinating. On this day of September 6th, the next day, September 7th, he's writing about all the money he took in and how harried he was. And then he'd also taken in a bunch of money a few days earlier during the powder alarm. And he's got all the, the totals that he took in. And then by the end of that time, he says, I'm sitting there with 1,000 pounds and it's making me nervous. He said it a little differently, but if you want to know exactly how he said it, you can either read the first side or come in separate and turn it over. Or the other thing you could do is you could, since not all of you have the time to do that, you could look it up in the First American Revolution, where these things are, by the way, not only cited, but quoted at great length. I mean, my sense of history is to take you back to that historical period and really get a sense of feel for where these people are coming from. And to that end, I actually use source materials within the narrative. I mean, a lot of times they say some of the person, the narrator, makes his point, and then they include the source thing just to prove the point. And I don't do that. I actually use the source material to tell some of the story. So you don't really want to skip over it. And it's generously included and very, I think, meticulously cited. I'm an absolute fanatic for footnotes, because without footnotes I could never have even started on this project. A history is a collective endeavor, and you build on each other. And if you say something in a work, any students out there, please take heed, and you do not footnote it, what you're saying is, I am so good and I am so right and I am so important that just trust me, take my word. And history doesn't work that way. It's a public enterprise, and so footnotes are a way of sharing our knowledge and pointing people in the right direction. So both of these books, The First American Revolution and The People's History of the American Revolution, are meticulously footnoted. There's the minutes, actually the records of the American Political Society, which was a private patriotic organization, are over there. And it's fascinating about how they, well, there's a lot of just good stuff in there about how they limit the amount of, in their bylaws, they limit the amount of drinking to the certain amount. Actually, I was intending to quote it, but I'm kind of running out of time, so that'll give you something to do. By the way, also, if you can get by without looking at the original, although it's not as much fun, it does save the original. Let's just take the American Political Society. I was working from that, and then I found out that Ken Moynihan, another local historian, I consulted, by the way, two local historians on the finer points, Ken Moynihan and Holly Eisner, who just gave me excellent help in local work. And they, Ken has actually transcribed that, so you can actually, and I think that's on file here too, so you can in fact look at what they said and maybe take a brief look for kind of color and everything, but you don't always have to get to the original for a lot of purposes. Perhaps the most important information came from the Parkman diary. Parkman was a minister in nearby Westboro, and his son Breck attended the Worcester event. And that night he came home and he reported to his father who was where and who would come and where. And that's why we have, if you look at that material there, that it's open to the page where we have a list of all 37 towns and how many people came from each town. So if you come from any of the outlying towns, or I don't think outlying sounds like, that's kind of like a Boston phenomenon. We don't want to call things outlying, right? Once again, see how these things creep into your speech, even for the most well-intentioned. But here in the book, again, is that list of 37 towns, and you can see, for instance, if you're from Royalston, that you had 39 people show up, or if you're from Harvard, you had 103, Lunenburg, 40, etc. Some of these towns might not exist anymore, but I think most of them do. So I guess that is it for now. I do want to entertain questions and maybe get into a little discussion for a few minutes here. I just want to conclude by saying thanks to the American Antiquarian Society for twofold thanks. For being here, for helping to make the book happen with all the materials, and actually threefold. For being here and preserving them, first, and secondly, for opening up their doors to people like me to come in, and thirdly, of course, for inviting me to share my work with you.